It always starts the same way. She looks at you not as you are, but as who she has decided you could become. You feel it before you can name it, that warmth in her eyes, that attention that feels like sunlight after a long winter. You think, finally someone sees me, finally someone chooses me, and you give her everything, your time, your energy, your guard comes down completely. You let her into places nobody else has ever been, and for a while it feels like the most real thing you have ever experienced. But here is what Carl Jung knew that you did not. She was never looking at you. She was looking through you, past you, at something she built inside her own mind long before you ever walked into her life. A figure, an image, a man she invented from old wounds and childhood dreams, and every story she was ever told about what love is supposed to feel like. And you, without knowing it, without being warned, walked into the role she had already written. You were not chosen, you were cast. And the moment you stopped performing the part she needed you to play, the moment the real you began to show through the character she had painted over you, everything changed. And you were left standing there, confused and hollow, and completely unable to understand what you did wrong. But Jung spent his entire life studying exactly this, not with comforting words, not with easy answers, with the cold, unflinching precision of a man who devoted his existence to mapping the darkest and most dangerous territories of the human psyche. And what he found there was something that most men will go their entire lives without ever understanding. Something that explains not just one relationship that hurt you, but every relationship that has ever left you feeling invisible. Jung discovered that human beings do not fall in love with other people. They fall in love with images. They fall in love with projections. They fall in love with the psychological figures they carry inside themselves and then cast onto the faces of the people standing in front of them. And when that projection is immature, when it is built from unhealed wounds and unexamined fantasies, it becomes one of the most destructive forces in any human relationship. He called it the animus, the inner masculine figure that lives inside the unconscious of every woman. And understanding what it is and what it does will change the way you see every relationship you have ever had.
The animus is not a choice. It is not something she decided to do to you. It operates entirely beneath conscious awareness, in the deep underground of the psyche, where most people never dare to look. Jung described it as the internalized image of the masculine that every woman builds across her lifetime, shaped by her father, by her earliest experiences of men, by the stories she absorbed about what a man is supposed to be, by her wounds and her longings and her fears. And this image lives inside her with enormous psychological power. It colors everything she sees. It filters every man she meets through its own expectations and desires and fears. And when a man walks into her life who triggers that inner image, who reminds her unconscious of the figure she has been carrying inside herself, something electric happens. She feels it as love, as recognition, as fate. But what she is actually experiencing is the activation of a projection. She is not seeing you. She is seeing the animus wearing your face. And you feel it too, because being the object of that kind of intensity feels extraordinary. It feels like being truly known. It feels like someone has finally seen the deepest version of you. But that is precisely the trap. Because she is not seeing the deepest version of you. She is seeing the deepest version of herself reflected back through you. And the relationship that follows is built not on two real people choosing each other clearly and consciously, but on one person falling in love with her own psychological creation and dragging you into the role of playing it convincingly. You are not a partner. You are a projection screen. And the cruelest part is that you had no idea. Nobody warned you. Nobody taught you that this is how the unconscious operates. Nobody explained to you that the most intense feelings of being loved and seen and chosen can sometimes be the most complete form of not being seen at all. Jung warned that when the animus is undeveloped, when a woman has never done the deep and painful work of examining her own inner masculine, it becomes what he called a possession, a state where she is no longer operating from her own conscious self, but from the grip of this unconscious figure. And in that state, she will argue without knowing what she is actually arguing about. She will feel betrayed without being able to name what betrayed her. She will feel that you have changed, when what has actually happened is that you have simply become more real than her projection can accommodate. And when the projection cracks, when the real you becomes impossible to ignore, when you fail to perform the role in the way her inner image demands, the feeling she called love begins to curdle. Not because you did anything wrong, not because you failed her in any real sense, but because you were never able to be what she actually fell in love with. Because what she fell in love with was never you. It was the man she invented in your place. And you cannot compete with a fantasy. You cannot outperform an image built from decades of unconscious longing. You cannot make her see you clearly when she has been looking at something else all along. And so she leaves, or she stays but something essential is gone, or she rewrites the story of who you were so completely that you no longer recognize yourself in the version she describes to others. And you are left with the wreckage, trying to understand how something that felt so real could have been so hollow at its core. But here's what Jung understood that most men never reach. Her inability to see you was never a verdict on your worth. Her projection was never a measurement of your value. The failure of her love was not evidence that you are unlovable. It was evidence that she had never done the inner work required to love a real person rather than an imagined one. And the question Jung would ask you now is not, what did you do wrong? The question he would ask is, what part of you allowed it? What part of you was so hungry for that feeling of being chosen that you were willing to become whatever she needed rather than remaining who you actually are? Because Jung was ruthless about this. He did not only hold women accountable for their projections, he held men equally accountable for their participation in the illusion. He described a parallel phenomenon in men, the anima, the inner feminine figure that men carry in their own unconscious, and he observed that men who have not done their own inner work are just as prone to projection, just as likely to fall not for the real woman standing in front of them, but for the image of woman they carry inside themselves. A man with an undeveloped anima will worship a woman who triggers his inner image and call it love. He will make himself smaller to keep her. He will abandon his own values and his own truth and his own dignity to maintain the feeling of being chosen. He will mistake her approval for his own worth. He will define himself through her eyes rather than through his own. And every time she withdraws that approval, he will feel himself disappear. Jung called this the greatest psychological trap of intimate relationships. Two people, each projecting their own inner figures onto the other, each falling in love not with who is actually there, but with who they need the other person to be. And the relationship becomes not a meeting of two conscious human beings, but a collision of two unconscious fantasies. It feels intense because projections always feel intense. It feels like fate because the unconscious always speaks in the language of destiny. But underneath the intensity there is no real foundation because there was never any real seeing. There was only the desperate human need to be known, meeting the equally desperate human need to love something that confirms what you already believe about yourself and the world. Jung also identified something he called the shadow, the part of yourself you have spent your entire life refusing to look at, the anger you were told was unacceptable, the grief you buried because you were taught that men do not cry, the fear you covered with confidence, the longing you disguised as indifference, every quality you rejected in yourself, every part of you that felt too dangerous or too shameful or too weak to admit got pushed down into the shadow. And here's what Jung discovered about the shadow that will disturb you deeply if you sit with it long enough. You do not escape your shadow by ignoring it. You do not outrun it by achieving more or working harder or becoming more successful. The shadow follows you into every relationship you ever have, and it expresses itself in the most painful and humiliating ways at the worst possible moments. The rage that comes out of nowhere and destroys something good. The self-sabotage that arrives precisely when things are finally going well. The pattern of choosing the wrong person over and over again despite knowing better. The inexplicable feeling of not deserving the things you want most. That is your shadow operating from beneath your awareness. And until you turn around and face it, until you stop running and actually look at the parts of yourself you have been hiding from, you will keep recreating the same pain in different relationships with different faces. Jung said the meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow, and he meant it as a warning, because the shadow does not announce itself. It does not give you a moment to prepare. It simply arrives in the form of your worst patterns and your deepest wounds and the relationships that keep ending the same way no matter how different they seemed at the beginning. The woman who could not see you clearly was partly a product of her own unexamined shadow, but the man who kept showing up hoping to finally be seen was partly a product of yours. And this is the hardest truth Jung ever asked anyone to hold. The love that hurt you the most was not just something that happened to you. It was also something your own unconscious participated in creating. Not because you deserved the pain, but because unexamined people find each other. Wounded people recognize each other across a crowded room and call it chemistry. Unhealed people fit together in ways that feel like destiny, but are actually repetition. The work of individuation is the work of interrupting that repetition, of becoming conscious enough that you stop recreating the past and start actually living in the present. It is the hardest work a human being can do. It is also the only work that actually changes anything at the level where change actually matters. Jung's answer to this was not to become cynical. It was not to close yourself off or to stop wanting love or to treat every woman as a psychological threat. His answer was individuation, the long and difficult and absolutely necessary process of becoming a whole person within yourself, of going into the parts of yourself you have avoided, of facing the wounds you have buried, of examining your own projections and taking full responsibility for them, of becoming so genuinely yourself, so rooted in your own identity, so clear about your own values and your own truth that no projection can find purchase on you. A man who has done his inner work cannot be cast in someone else's psychological drama, not because he is cold or closed off, but because he is too fully himself to disappear into a role. He meets people as they actually are, rather than as he needs them to be, and he can be met in return as he actually is. That is what real love requires, not two people finding their perfect match, not fate or chemistry or the lightning bolt feeling of instant recognition, but two people who have each done enough of their own inner work to actually see each other clearly, without the distortion of projection, without the performance of a role, without the constant exhausting work of trying to be what someone else's unconscious demands. And here is what that kind of love actually feels like when you finally experience it. It is quieter than what you have known before. It does not arrive with the electric intensity of projection. It does not feel like being struck by lightning. It feels more like coming home, like being in a room where you do not have to perform, where you do not have to manage how you are perceived, where you can be uncertain and be met with patience rather than disappointment, where you can be real and be chosen for exactly that reality rather than despite it. Most men have never experienced this because most men have never done the work that makes it possible. They keep chasing the lightning bolt feeling without understanding that the lightning bolt is almost always projection. It is almost always two unconscious people colliding with enormous force and calling it love. Real love does not feel like collision. It feels like recognition. Not the false recognition of projection, where she sees who she invented in your place, but the real recognition of two conscious people who have looked honestly at themselves and can therefore look honestly at each other. She did not love you, she loved who she invented in your place, and the tragedy is not that she projected. The tragedy is that you never knew it was happening, but now you do. And what you do with that knowledge, whether you use it to become more bitter or to become more whole, that is the choice that defines everything that comes next for you. Jung spent his life insisting that the unconscious must be made conscious, that the only way through the pain of a love that was never real is not to close your heart, but to open your eyes. To see yourself clearly enough that you stop volunteering for roles that require you to disappear. To become so genuinely present in your own life that the next time someone looks at you, if they are looking at a projection, you will feel it immediately, and you will have the strength to step out of the frame. The next video on this channel goes deeper into exactly how that process of individuation works in practice, not in theory, not in abstract psychological language, but in the specific daily reality of a man who is trying to become more conscious, more whole, more genuinely himself. If this video reached something real in you, share it with one person who you think is carrying this pain alone right now. They will not tell you they need it, but they do. Subscribe because every single video on this channel is built for the kind of person who watched this one all the way to the end. Because you are not a character in someone else's story. You never were. And the sooner you understand that completely, the sooner you can begin writing your own.